It's a lonely place to be, watching everyone around you move forward, succeeding and smiling like it all comes easy. And then, when the world quiets down and you're finally alone, you look in the mirror, and you don't like what you see. You start to wonder if maybe the problem isn't what you're doing, maybe the problem is just you. That quiet fear, the one that whispers, "You're not enough," can eat away at you, reshaping the way that you see the world and your place in it. The fear of not being good enough is something that follows us like a shadow. It hides in the little moments, the times that you compare yourself to a friend who seems more talented, or when you convince yourself that no matter how hard you try, it's inevitable that you'll fail, and it doesn't really matter how much others reassure you, 'cause deep down, that voice inside still lingers. This fear can shape a person more than they realize. It can push you to hide behind a smile, to keep up the mask of confidence while inside you are crumbling. It can fuel jealousy when someone else succeeds where you've stumbled. It can leave you in the shadow of others, unable to escape the thought that their light only exposes your inadequacy. And yet, for some reason, everyone, in one way or another, has felt the sting of not being good enough. Many stories throughout anime explore this fear. They peel back the layers of characters who struggle with weakness, jealousy, or self-doubt, and through them, we see reflections of the same battle that we fight within ourselves. They show us the ways that this fear can define a person, and also the ways that it can be overcome. And by the end of this video, hopefully we'll have answered one question. If the fear of not being good enough is something we all face, then what does it mean to live with it, to grow in spite of it? And how can we use this as fuel to our fires? There's a unique kind of cruelty in believing that you're not good enough. It's not simply a lack of confidence, nor is it the fleeting insecurity that everyone experiences from time to time. It's heavier than that, like carrying an invisible burden that no one else can see. You can smile, you can laugh, you can try and be the life of the party, but beneath it all, you're still suffocating under the weight of your own perceived inadequacy. This is the prison Subaru Natsuki finds himself in from the very beginning of ReZero. At first glance, Subaru might not seem like the standard tragic hero. He's loud, brash, and overconfident. He treats life like a performance, as if all eyes should be on him. But this surface-level personality is exactly that, a surface. Underneath, Subaru is a young man who fears that deep down, he is utterly worthless. And in many ways, his journey in ReZero is not about surviving endless death loops or fighting monsters. It's about confronting the truth of his own self-worth. What makes Subaru such a fascinating character is how uncomfortably raw his flaws are. He is not the chosen one. He is not a natural genius. Nor was he endowed with overwhelming strength. Instead, Subaru is ordinary. Painfully ordinary. And in a world that constantly celebrates the extraordinary, being ordinary can feel like being invisible. From the very beginning, Subaru tries to mask his insecurity with fake bravado. He walks into this new world acting confident and cool. He's capable of recognizing this behavior as cringe and stupid, yet he still prefers to act this way. Sometimes even doubling down on his actions because he's afraid to admit how foolish and pitiful his behavior is. He pretends like he belongs in a story where he's the hero. But confidence built on nothing but performance eventually collapses. And the moment that Subaru realizes that his role in this world isn't that of a destined savior, but of someone utterly unremarkable, the mask begins to crack. It's here that we see the brilliance of Subaru's character writing. Because his greatest enemy is not the world around him, Instead, it's himself. Every failure becomes fuel for his belief that he isn't good enough. And trust me, there's a lot of failure. Every rejection, every death, every moment he fails to save someone he loves reinforces the narrative he already whispers to himself. You are useless. You are weak. You don't matter. One of the cruelest aspects of the fear of not being good enough is how it thrives on comparison. You don't simply believe you're inadequate, you believe you're inadequate because someone else is better. Subaru is constantly confronted with characters who embody the things he lacks. Reinhardt with his strength, Amelia with her selflessness, Rem with her loyalty. Each of them is a mirror reflecting Subaru's shortcomings back at him. And what makes this worse is that Subaru knows it, but he can't escape it. He is painfully aware of how little he contributes compared to those around him. This awareness doesn't push him towards humility, it pushes him towards desperation. He clings to the idea that if he tries hard enough, if he sacrifices enough, if he proves himself in some dramatic way, then maybe he'll finally feel like he's enough. But desperation rarely leads to growth. More often, it leads to self-destruction. Subaru's infamous crash outs, where he screams, lashes out, and humiliates himself, aren't just moments of weakness. They're the inevitable breakdowns that come when someone builds their sense of worth on shaky ground. He tries to be more than what he is, and when reality refuses to bend to his fantasy, he spirals. And his power, returned by death, only makes it worse. The cruel irony is that it embodies the very fear that he lives with. It gives him infinite chances to fix his mistakes, but it also ensures that he will experience failure more than anyone else. Each time that he dies, he suffers. He watches his loved ones perish again and again, and each time that he fails, the voice inside him grows louder. You weren't enough to save them. You weren't enough to stop this. Return by death is not a gift. It's a curse. It forces Subaru to stare at his inadequacies over and over again. Most people can move on from failure, but Subaru is condemned to relive it until he gets it right. And that is the paradox of Subaru's journey. The more he fights to prove his worth, the more he confirms to himself that he had none to begin with. Because if he were truly capable, wouldn't he have just succeeded the first time? One of the most devastating aspects of Subaru's character is how he weaponizes his own self-hatred into acts of devotion. He claims to love Amelia, to fight for her, to sacrifice everything for her sake. But often, his devotion is less about Amelia and more about himself. Saving her, protecting her, being the one she depends on, these are not just acts of love. They are attempts to validate his worth. This is why, when Subaru fails to save her, his reactions are so extreme. It isn't about just letting her down, it's about losing the only role that gave his existence meaning. If he cannot be the hero of the story, then who is he? And this is where the fear of not being good enough becomes truly dangerous, because it convinces Subaru that his worth is conditional, that he only matters if he can save others, if he can carry the weight alone. It blinds him to the possibility that his existence has value simply as it is. The turning point for Subaru comes when he is forced to confront the truth of his weakness. His lowest moments, when he's faced with public humiliation, rejection, and despair, strip away the illusions that he built around himself. He cannot hide behind confidence anymore. He cannot pretend that he's the hero of the story. And it's here that Subaru begins to understand that his fear cannot be conquered by denial, or by proving yourself endlessly to others. It can only be faced by acceptance. by recognizing that worth isn't earned through constant victory or sacrifice, but through the simple act of being human. Subaru doesn't suddenly stop fearing that he isn't enough. Fears like that don't just vanish overnight, but he learns to carry it differently. He learns that he doesn't need to be perfect to be loved, and that he doesn't need to be the strongest to have value. And most importantly, he learns that asking for help and relying on others doesn't make him less. It makes him more human. Subaru's story resonates so deeply because it doesn't shy away from the ugliness of not being good enough. He isn't the stoic hero who silently bears his pain. He's messy, emotional, and insecure. He makes mistakes that are hard to watch. He says the wrong things and lashes out at the wrong people. But that's what makes him real. Because the fear of not being good enough is not graceful. It makes us insecure, jealous, and desperate. And just like Subaru, many of us have to learn that the way out of this fear is not through perfection, but through acceptance. There's something intoxicating about ambition. At its best, it propels people towards growth, challenging them to climb higher than they ever thought possible. But at its worst, ambition isn't about reaching for greatness, it's about filling a void. This is where Teta Kiseki from Tokyo Revengers lives, a character whose every decision, every scheme, and every horrific act is not born from true strength, but from an unshakable insecurity. For him, power isn't a means to build a better world, but a mask to hide the crushing belief that without it, he's nothing. On the surface, Kiseki presents himself as cold, calculating, and assured, a master manipulator who bends gangs, leaders, and timelines to his will. But beneath that facade is a boy who never stopped being the timid child, hiding behind the corner while Takemichi stood up to the bullies. Kiseki's cruelty, his power, and his obsession with rewriting fate itself are not his strength. In fact, they are the shadows of weakness. Kiseki's entire existence is built upon the fear of not being good enough. A fear so consuming that he twists it into a desperate hunger for superiority. When Kiseki was young, he was considered a prodigy, academically gifted, intelligent, the kind of child that parents and teachers praise as special. But brilliance in books doesn't necessarily translate to courage in life. Kiseki was isolated, unable to form meaningful connections, and deeply insecure. And in that childhood isolation, Kiseki's first defining moment arrived. The day Hinata was harassed by bullies, and Takemichi stepped in. Takemichi wasn't strong, he wasn't smart, but he did something that Kiseki couldn't. He acted. He put himself in harm's way for someone else. It was this small, almost unremarkable act of bravery that forever altered Kiseki's trajectory. Hinata admired Takemichi for his courage, and Kiseki, standing in the shadows, realized that all of his academic brilliance meant nothing. In that moment, he wasn't the smartest kid in the room, he was the coward. This memory is critical, because it reveals the truth about Kiseki. His obsession with power doesn't come from ambition in the traditional sense. It comes from the deep wound of inadequacy, from the belief that who he was up to this moment was inherently unworthy of love. Takemichi, in Kiseki's eyes, stole from him the one thing that he could never fabricate: authenticity. Bravery that didn't come from calculation but from instinct. Hinata's admiration was proof of that authenticity, and Kiseki interpreted her love as the ultimate judgment of his own inadequacy. If Kiseki couldn't win the love of Hinata, then he wasn't good enough. If he couldn't be loved for who he was, then he would have to change the very rules of the game. If the world didn't value him, then he would bend the world until it did. But unfortunately, every choice that he made, every cruelty he committed, was still tethered to that same fear. the fear of not being good enough. We see this most clearly in Kisaki's relationship with Takemichi. To Kisaki, Takemichi was not just a rival, he was a reminder. Every timeline where Takemichi persevered, where he fought for Hinata despite his weakness, was another timeline where Kisaki's inadequacy was thrown back in his face. And even though Kisaki wasn't jumping from timeline to timeline like Takemichi, it still hurt knowing that however much planning, however much conniving that Kisaki crafted, he still lost to Takemichi every time. And the tragedy of Kisaki is that his brilliance was real. His intelligence, his ability to manipulate, his foresight, they were unmatched. But all those qualities were never enough for him, because at his core, Kisaki didn't just want to be acknowledged as intelligent, he wanted to be loved. And when he believed that he couldn't earn that love naturally, he decided to take it by force. His obsession with Hinata wasn't truly about her as a person. It was about what she represented. She was the proof that he could finally be enough. If she loved him, then the child who once cowered in the shadows could finally silence the voice telling him he wasn't worthy. But Kisaki couldn't accept that Hinata's love was never his to claim. He could never accept rejection. And so, in every timeline, her murder becomes the ultimate expression of his fear. If he couldn't have her, then no one could. This act is not just cruel, it's desperate. The act of a man who cannot bear to face his own inadequacies, so he destroys the very thing that makes him feel it, that makes him remind him of it. Kisaki's story is one of the most harrowing depictions of the fear of not being good enough in anime, because it shows us what happens when that fear curdles into obsession. Many of us wrestle with self-doubt. Many of us struggle with inferiority complexes. But Kisaki shows us the darkness of what happens when we refuse to confront that fear honestly, when we let it define us, when we let it dictate every choice that we make. His entire life becomes a performance designed to mask the fear that he's inadequate, that he can never be loved. And maybe that's why this story resonates, even through its cruelty. Kisaki's tragedy is not just that he lost, or that his schemes ultimately unraveled. His tragedy is that he never realized the truth, that he was enough all along. Not because of his brilliance or because of his manipulations, he was enough simply as he was. But by the time he had a chance to realize that, it was already too late. There is a particular kind of pain that doesn't come from wounds you can see. It's the pain of being underestimated before you've even had the chance to prove yourself, of being dismissed as incapable because the world has already decided your limits for you. Imagine being born into a life where every glance at you carries pity, where every whispered word you catch isn't encouragement but ridicule. Imagine knowing that no matter how hard you try, the world will never see you as enough, not because of who you are, but because of what you lack. This is the reality of Boji from Ranking of Kings. Born into royalty, he should have been destined for greatness, but a curse stripped him of his strength before he could even walk. His body is frail, his voice is altered by deafness, his attempts at communication are limited. On the surface, he seems like the furthest thing from a king, and the tragedy is not only that others see him this way, it's that he begins to see himself this way too. Boji's life is one long chorus of doubt. Every insult, every sneer, every accusation reverberates in his mind like an echo chamber. And the cruel irony is that he understands it all. People believe that his silence makes him oblivious, but through lip reading, he catches the sting of every word. He hears their judgment more clearly than anyone realizes. And because he cannot easily voice his pain, it festers inside of him. What does a child do when even his own family questions his ability? What does anyone do when the people closest to them reinforce the very insecurities they fight so hard to suppress? This is where Boji's story resonates beyond fantasy. His struggles mirror the fear that so many of us carry. The fear that no matter how hard we work, our limitations will always define us. But Boji's tale isn't just about despair, it's about resistance. Because despite his weakness, despite the humiliation and betrayal, Boji does not stop moving forward. He feels small, but he refuses to be defined by smallness. Even when stripped of confidence, he clings to determination. He cries in front of others and he breaks under pressure, but each breakdown is followed by persistence. And this is what makes Boji's character so compelling. His weakness is not erased, and his insecurities are not magically solved by a single act of courage. Instead, his strength grows in unconventional ways. He cannot swing a sword like his father, so he learns to evade, to anticipate, to fight on his own terms. He cannot dominate through force, so he learns to lead through empathy. Boji shows us that strength is not about overpowering others, it's about refusing to let the world's judgment strip away your will to continue. This ties into a deeper psychological truth. When people are told again and again that they are not enough, they internalize it. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, a state where repeated failure or ridicule convinces someone that success is impossible, so they stop trying altogether. By all accounts, Boji should have fallen victim to this. The betrayal of those he trusted, the dismissal of his worth, the humiliation of being passed over for kingship despite being named his father's successor, any one of those reasons should have broken him, and yet he resists. He still rises each day with the quiet defiance of someone who refuses to let despair win. And it's in this way that his journey reminds us that the fear of inadequacy doesn't disappear when we achieve recognition or power. Instead, it disappears when we decide that even if we fail, even if we fall short, our worth isn't dictated by others' perceptions. Boji can never be his father, and he doesn't need to be. His true victory lies not in conquering kingdoms, but in redefining what it means to be strong. Boji's weakness is his curse, yes, but it's also his gift. It forces him to find a new definition of power, a power that comes not from might, but from authenticity. When Boji stands before the world, he embodies a truth that often gets buried in our insecurities, that resilience itself is strength. That tears are not a sign of failure, but of honesty. That inadequacy doesn't define us. Instead, it's how we respond to it that does define us. Boji may never silence the whispers of doubt, but with every step forward that he takes, he proves that even the smallest voice can echo louder than all the ridicule in the world. So when we ask ourselves whether we are enough, Boji doesn't answer that question with words. He answers with the quiet persistence of a boy who should have had no chance at all, yet still stands tall against the weight of a world that told him he couldn't. And in that defiance, he offers us the reminder that we desperately need. Maybe being enough isn't about meeting the world's standards. It's about refusing to let those standards decide the value of your life.